Today we're talking about the Elves and the Shoemaker, which takes place on Christmas and can technically be considered a Christmas story. But some people don't know is this story is actually a set of three that were all combined together by the Brothers Grimm. The three stories all have to do with the English translation Elves. The Grimm brothers called this story Die Wichtelmänner. I'm not German, sorry. Wichtelmen translates to either the important men, or one article I read said that the word could come from the Proto-Germanic Wichtes, is spelled like this, which may mean thing or creature, which could mean that they are like creature men or thing men. Anyway, it's clear they are of the Fae. They are fairy creatures, elves, whatever you want to call them. The first story we're going to talk about is the Shoemaker one. It's more familiar than the other two, and you'll see why. It starts with a man who's a shoemaker or cobbler, and he's so poor and his business is doing so bad, he only has leather enough for one pair of shoes. So he cuts them out to get ready to make shoes in the morning and then decides to go to bed. But he wakes up and the shoes have already been made. And not only that, but they're made perfectly, like better than he ever could. And he sells them to this customer for more than they normally would have paid because the shoes are so great. And then he has enough money to get leather enough for two shoes. It does say something about this man that this good fortune is coming to him because he is industrious. He doesn't use that extra money on himself or to do something fancy. It's to continue making more shoes and be more productive. So he leaves the leather out for the two shoes. In the morning they're made. He sells them for even more than he ever would have before. And this continues every night. And so one night near Christmas, he says to his wife, let's stay up tonight and watch and see who's doing this. Hide behind some old clothes. And then it says at midnight, two cute little naked men appeared. And if you're wondering if it's important that they're naked, yes, it is. I do think it's funny the translation literally says they're cute though. I don't know. Like in this one, they're not as cute. And if you think they kind of look like Dobby/house elves from Harry Potter, there's a reason for that too. So they work hard and cheerfully, and then they run away when they're done. And so the husband and wife are like, man, we're so grateful to these guys. What can we do for them? The wife's like, they are naked, running around in the cold, freezing. Let's make them some clothes. So she sews them jackets, shirt, pants, socks, and he makes them little shoes. They leave them out that night, and then they hide again to see what they're going to do. They see the clothes, and they're delighted and surprised, and they put them on, and they sing a little song where they say, are we not boys, neat and fine? No longer cobblers shall we be. They hop and dance out of the house, and they never come back, but that's okay because the cobbler is now a wealthy man. He says he prospered and succeeded in everything he did. Now, the interesting thing about the little creatures who come in and help you with your work, but if you give them clothes, you have paid them and they quit working for you, that's throughout folklore. There's another German tale where it's a dwarf and he quits once he gets clothes. There's another German one with elves who help with mill grinding until they're given clothes. The Polish one where they're just called the underground people. Sweden, there's the Nisa or Tomt in Denmark. There's one from Bohemia where there's apparently a group of little women who are no bigger than the size of a 1-year-old child who love washing clothes, and they always meet to wash at this pond, and this one boy captures one and traps it like in a net. But she doesn't complain or resist. He takes her home, and when she gets there, she immediately rolls up her sleeves and starts washing clothes. He continues to work for this whole family, just kind of being their maid for a long time, until finally they're like, you don't have shoes. We'd like to give you some shoes. But she won't let them measure her feet for the shoes. So they trick her by spreading about flour, and she walks across it, and they measure her footprints in the flour, and they make her shoes. But when they give them to her, she starts crying and sobbing because this meant she's been paid for her service now and she has to leave. But apparently she doesn't want to, but she has to by the code of her people, and so she runs away crying. In England, the same thing happens in a lot of tales about pixies. Basically, the whole J.K. Rowling house elves get freed when you present them with clothes things. She didn't make that up. That was already very prevalent throughout folklore in all of Western Europe. Now, like I said, this is just the first in a group of 3 stories that the Grimm brothers put together. The second one involves this poor servant girl who's sweeping, doing her job, and she finds this letter, but she's illiterate and she can't read. So she takes it to her masters and they read it for her, and they're like, you have been invited to the Garden of the Elves. It's going to be an elf baptism, and they would like you to be the godmother. First, she doesn't want to go. I mean, I'd be a little skeptical as well, but her masters are like, no, it's cool, go. So she goes, and they invite her in, and they have like a very small place, but everything is beautiful. She helps with the baptism and then asks to leave, and they're like, no, stay a couple more days with us. They do everything to make her happy. They wait on her, they give her gold, they give her pretty things to wear, but eventually she's like, I need to go. But when she goes home, she learns it hasn't been 3 days, it's been 7 years. And her old masters are dead now. No word on if that makes her happy or sad or what she does after that. That's just the story. That does often happen in fairy stories. Another one, I talk about a bride who gets lured away by fairies on her wedding day and dances and parties with them and then comes back and it's been 100 years and everyone's dead. Like, that's obviously where Rip Van Winkle comes from. Other stories of human women being taken away not just to be godmothers, but to be midwives to other creatures. There's another one in Germany where a woman is taken to be the midwife to a mermaid, and it's kind of cool. It says the water parts and she goes deep underground of the water so she doesn't have to breathe underwater. She helps with the birth, and then she's given these 3 gold pieces, and she's told that if her family keeps them and doesn't tell anyone about them or separate them, then they'll be wealthy forever. Her 2 oldest sons end up respecting the wishes of the mermaid and doing well, but the 3rd one says that he went off and was ruined by a woman who convinced him to give her the money, and then they died penniless in Prague. There's also a story from Ireland called The Fairy Nurse about this human woman who has a baby and she's nursing him, but the king of the fairies, his wife can't nurse their baby because she's sick, and so he wants this woman, and so he sends fairies to kidnap her, and they bring her to this manor house. She meets another mortal woman there who's like their servant, and she's like, yo, don't eat anything here because I ate stuff here and I got trapped here, so don't do that. She's like, cool. So then the king comes out with this baby and gives it to her, and he's like, all right, nurse this baby. And so she does, and apparently she only needed to do it one time, because then he shows her this big banquet and he's like, eat. And she's like, no. He's like, ooh, you're smart. Okay. And he puts this ointment on her eyes, and when she opens them again, she's in this cave filled with bones. And he's like, hey, just in case you didn't know, this is to show you we are the folk, the fairy people. And he specifically says, we are the fallen angels that the people above the earth call fairies. And I'll make another video about different theories about where fairies came from, including fallen angels later. He also takes her in another room where there's a bunch of small children that are just playing and blindfolded. And he's like, oh, these are babies that died before they got baptized, so this is like where they go. Then he takes her to this pretty garden with a large gate. She goes through it, he's gone, gate's gone, and she starts to head home, and then she sees a woman who looks just like her coming from her house, who's been like her changeling. The fairy who has been made up to look like her says, man, your husband's an idiot for not knowing the difference. She just goes back to fairyland, and our girl is just like, okay, and then she goes home and sees her baby is super happy and has been nursed while she was gone, and she lives a happy rest of her life, presumably. The 3rd tale is about a changeling, and it's a lot like the ones that I had talked about in a different video about changelings. The woman has her child taken by elves, replaced by a changeling that is grotesque, doesn't look right, and eats too much, and just cries all the time, and is the opposite of what you want a child to be. So her neighbors say, put the child in the hearth and boil water and put it inside 2 eggshells, and that will make the child laugh. She does, the changeling laughs, and then a band of elves appeared, brings the rightful child back, and takes the changeling back with them. When he laughs, he kind of reveals himself. He says, now I am as old as the Wester wood, but have never seen anyone cooking in shells. Check out my podcast, Folktales and Fairy Lore, and my book, Dust Spells, which is a retelling of the grim story of the 12 dancing princesses, and maybe leave some leather for shoes out tonight. See what happens.